The official verdict on my son's project was 3 words long: lacks scientific merit. I saw them written on the clipboard before the judge even opened his mouth. A verdict delivered, not on the science, but on us. It was a judgment passed in a crowded gymnasium, loud enough for me to see, loud enough for my son to feel. Even if he never heard the words themselves, the judges moved past his display as if it were a ghost at the feast. A smudge on the one of them, a man with a really practiced indifference, offered a clean, another, a woman in a crystal he stood rooted to the spot near the bleachers. The cold fury mixing with the familiar sweet. I watched him and wondered how many more footballs a girl like this could inflict before he bled out all his light. His name is Leo. He's 12. He had built something real. Something born from junkyard scraps, and a mind that saw connections I never could. He had created it with his own 2 hands. And he was proud. For weeks, our small apartment had transformed into a chaotic laboratory of salvaged electronics. He'd spent hours hunched over discarded speakers and old microphones, carefully extracting wires, testing piezoelectric crystals, and devouring physics articles online that were light years beyond his 7th grade curriculum. And when he walked into that gymnasium, his shoulders squared and his head held high, despite the whispers that followed us like a shadow. I let myself hope. I prayed that for once, someone would actually see him, the brilliant, quiet boy behind the tarnished family name. They didn't. Not until one man, an outsider, wandered in. He wasn't on the judge's panel. He wore no official badge. But he stopped. He stopped at Leo's small, hand-painted booth. He asked my son questions. He listened to the answers. Then he turned, his gaze finding mine across the crowded room. And with an unnerving seriousness, he said, "This isn't just clever. This is viable." In that moment, the entire world tilted on its axis. My name is Sarah. And for the last 6 years, it's been just me and Leo. We're anchored in a small industrial town in Ohio, the kind of place that rusts a little more each year, where memories are long and forgiveness is short. It's a town where stories are an area that sticks to you like ramen and fingernails. Everyone knows everyone visits, and if you stumble, even worse, you'll circle the spot and clean it. I married Mark right after Christmas. He was the town's only and utterly unprepared for the crushing reality of being a father. Mark decided the life he lived was a kid. He packed a single bag and even though there nothing but more than the kitchen counter. I need something more than this. After he left, the whispers began. They said I'd pushed him away, that I was too demanding, too broken. I didn't have the energy to fight back. I was too busy working. I was a waitress at the diner from sunrise until the lunch rush faded. Then I'd race to the logistics warehouse to scan boxes on the night shift until my vision blurred. Every single dollar was a soldier sent to fight a war against eviction notices, empty cupboards, and the quiet shame of not having enough. There was no room for pride. I'd arrive at parent-teacher conferences smelling faintly of coffee and cardboard, with dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. The other mothers, with their neat blouses and easy smiles, would offer polite, distant nods before turning back to their circles. I knew I was an outsider in their pristine world of bake sales and book clubs. That was fine. I wasn't there for them. I was there for Leo. Leo has always moved to his own rhythm. He's observant, methodical, and possesses a boundless imagination that lives inside his quiet shell. He doesn't care about being popular. He's never needed an audience. Just give him a broken turntable, a handful of wires, and his sketchbook, and he's content for hours. From the time he was small, he was obsessed with the hidden architecture of things. He would meticulously disassemble his old toys. Not to destroy them, but to understand the symphony of gears and circuits inside, trying to reassemble the parts into something entirely new. One evening, I dragged myself home from a 14-hour day to find our kitchen copper plates and something that looked like shattered crystals. Leo looked up at me, his face alight with an intensity that chased away my anxiety. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. I think the thing that life was saying. I said that. I almost laughed. It wasn't an inspiration. Just the reflex of him to defend the original sound. But then he started explaining. He used words like creative resonance, talking about how certain crystals could revolt when their screws were vibrated. He believed he could harness the ambient noise of the city, the rumble of trucks, the hum of machinery, the chorus of voices, and convert those vibrations into usable energy. I stood there, stunned, realizing he'd been teaching himself concepts I'd never even heard of. That's when he told me about the school science fair. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the careful way he phrased the question as if expecting me to refuse. And a part of me, the tired, practical part, almost did. The registration fee, the cost of a display board, the time it felt like another mountain to climb. But the look in his eyes, a fragile mix of hope and fear, broke through my defenses. I knew I had to make it happen. I picked up every extra shift I could, called in a favor from my sister for a few rides, and told him, "Let's do it." For the next month, the Echo Harvester, as he called it, became the center of his universe. He built a small, crude prototype. He'd mounted a series of delicate crystals onto a diaphragm inside a salvaged speaker cone. When sound waves hit the diaphragm, it vibrated, putting pressure on the crystals. The tiny electrical charge produced was channeled through a mess of wires to a single, small LED bulb. His theory was that if you scaled it up, arrays of these harvesters could be placed in noisy environments to generate trickles of power for streetlights or emergency signs, a form of renewable energy created from the noise pollution we usually just ignore. He worked on it relentlessly, his bedroom becoming a nest of soldering tools and meticulous records of his efforts, pages of handwritten calculations and observations. He couldn't afford a proper display, so he salvaged a huge piece of cardboard from the supermarket. He painted it black on the wall. I was prouder than I had ever been. Not because I thought he was wrong, but because he saw a problem and tried to build a solution to it next. He believed in his idea. He has the courage to oppose him. The town's whispers found us again. "Is that Sarah's boy really entering?" I heard one mother say to another in the grocery store aisle. I heard she's barely holding it together. With no father around, well, you know, you can't expect much. I just clenched my jaw. I forced a smile, and kept walking. Leo either didn't notice or was getting very good at pretending he didn't. He just kept working. The night before the fair, he packed his project into a worn cardboard box with the reverence of a museum curator. He'd borrowed one of my old, oversized lab coats from a biology class I took in community college and wore it over his clothes. Looking at him that morning, standing so straight and small with his invention, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel, I was struck by his quiet bravery. He didn't just want to be noticed. He wanted to be understood. And I prayed that someone, just one person, would look past our last name and see the boy who was trying to pull light out of thin air. The morning of the science fair arrived with a heavy, gray stillness that mirrored the knot in my stomach. Leo was up before dawn, dressed and checking his supplies for the 10th time before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. He had packed his prototype into a single endless reinforced cardboard box, every wire and connection secured with painstaking care. On the side, He'd written in his neat, blocky handwriting. Fragile. Acoustic harvester prototype. He had a checklist he'd made, and he methodically ticked off each item with a pencil. Crystal array. Diaphragm housing. Voltmeter. Notebook. He was a small general. He loaded his car into the back of the wagon and drove to the school mostly in silence. It wasn't even the expense. One thing was unspoken in his eyes. He was feeling himself for judgment. And I was trying to build a fortress around the park to protect the I saw fleets of pristine SUVs, unloading projects that looked like they belonged to the club. There were professionally painted vehicles, complex 3D containers, and one project that featured a whirring, miniature wind tunnel. Leo's gaze drifted from the gleaming displays back to his own scuffed cardboard box in the rearview mirror. His shoulders slumped. Just for a second. "You okay?" I asked. My voice softer than I intended. He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yeah. I mean, it's not about how it looks." Right. I lied, my heart aching. We both knew. In a place like this, it was almost entirely about how it looked. The gymnasium was a cacophony of sound and motion. A sprawling maze of tables where kids buzzed with a nervous, competitive energy. Parents hovered nearby, sipping from thermoses and murmuring last-minute advice like seasoned boxing coaches. The judges, clipboards in hand, were already making their rounds, their faces set in expressions of detached authority. We found Leo's assigned spot, tucked away in a back corner next to the emergency exit. As if by design, no one made eye contact. No one offered a smile. Leo quietly unpacked his display, arranged his hand-painted board, and ran one final test. He tapped the diaphragm gently, and the tiny LED bulb at the end of the wire flickered to life. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. A private moment of victory. That's when the whispers started. Quiet at first, then more pointed. A girl with a perfect ponytail at the next table leaned over to her friend. "That's the one I was telling you about," she said. Her voice was steady. The kid put her hands opposite. "Oh, right. The charity case." My stomach twisted into a knot of ice and fire. I stared around, looking for a teacher. Any adult human being. I saw nothing but polite surveillance and deliberate indifference. One of the critique neighbors. A woman who always looked like me. Glanced in the direction before turning back to the booth. Her mouth moved slightly behind the design collar. Leo continued to run her. I saw the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. A primal urge rose in me to snatch him out of there, to grab his hand and his box and just run. But he had worked too hard. This was his moment, however painful. So I stayed, a silent statue of rage. Then the judges arrived at his table. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, and they were chuckling about some private joke as they approached. The weary-looking man barely glanced up from his list of names. The other man gave the project a cursory 2-second scan. It was the woman who stopped. She read the title, "The Echo Harvester," and a small, condescending smile played on her lips. "And what's this supposed to be?" "Dear," she asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "A little music box that lights up." Leo stood a little straighter, his voice clear and steady, despite the tremor I could feel running through him. "It's a prototype for a micro-energy harvester," he explained, using piezoelectric principles to convert ambient sound vibrations into electrical energy. The woman cut him off with a dismissive little pat on his arm. "Well, that's very quaint," she said, the word hanging in the air like poison. She didn't ask how it worked. She didn't look at his notebook full of data. She just smiled that empty, polished smile and moved on. Her colleagues already several tables ahead, Coin? Not ingenious. Not promising. Just quaint. The kind of word you use for a needlepoint pillow or a kitten in a teacup. Leo slowly sat back down in his chair. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. And his eyes flickered to open his eyes. And finally, back down at the smoke, silent and wrenching on the table, I retreated to the bleachers. My hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails were like fires. I watched as other kids demonstrated violence by helping and completing their blowouts. Their parents recording every moment of expensive company. Leo's table was an island of silence. Grandma passed cookies from the street. A couple of older men snatched back from the table, slowing down just long enough to snicker. "Hey, isn't that the charity case's kid?" one of them said. Loud enough for half the gym to hear. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Leo heard them. Too. His face, which had been so pale, now seemed to lose all expression. He went perfectly still, a mask of neutrality sliding into place. But I knew what was happening. He was retreating, pulling all that light and brilliance deep inside where they couldn't touch it anymore. He was shutting down. I wanted to scream, to leap from the bleachers, and tear down every last one of their perfectly printed banners. I wanted to tell them what he had done, how he had spun an idea from thin air and built it from the city's trash. But I was frozen by a grief, so sharp it stole my breath. He sat there, a silent sentinel beside his small invention, surrounded by a world that had already decided he was worthless. And still, he didn't pack up. Not yet. I was sitting on those hard wooden bleachers, gripping the edge of the seat so tightly my fingers had gone numb. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, and a hot flush of shame and anger crept up my neck. I wanted to storm down there, to grab one of those dismissive judges by the lapels of their neat blazers and ask them how could they look at a child, any child who had poured his heart into something, and crush it with such casual cruelty? How could they not even bother to ask a single, genuine question? But I didn't move. I just breathed. In. Out. A ragged, shaky rhythm. I looked at Leo. He was still sitting there. His gaze focused on something. His back was impossibly straight. A small, defiant line against the world's indifference. His hands were folded in his lap, but I could see the tension in them. He was alive. They were doing it on inside. No one else could see. He didn't deserve this. Not after the nights he'd stayed. The glow of the soldering iron illuminating his focused face. Teaching himself a new way to see the world. He wasn't just trying to win a prize. He was trying to prove he existed. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but they carried me forward. Down the steps and onto the polished gymnasium floor. I didn't know what I was going to say or do. One part of me wanted to wrap him in my arms, pack up his project, and flee the suffocating judgment of that room. I wanted to tell him we didn't need their validation, that his mind was a universe they were too small to comprehend. But then I saw him. He was talking to a little boy, maybe a first grader, who had wandered away from his parents and was staring at the echo harvester with wide, curious eyes. Leo was pointing to the crystal array, his voice soft but clear, explaining how the vibrations traveled through the diaphragm. He showed the little boy how tapping the speaker cone made the LED flicker. His eyes were focused. His hands moved with a familiar, gentle precision. He was still in it. He was still trying. I stopped in my tracks. It hit me with the force of a revelation. My job wasn't to save him from this fight. He didn't need me to be his shield. He needed me to be his anchor. He needed to know that his worth wasn't measured by their applause or their scorn. So instead of intervening, I walked quietly to his table and crouched beside him. I rested my hand on his knee, feeling the slight tremor beneath the worn denim. "I'm so proud of you, Leo," I whispered. my voice thick with emotion. I don't care if they give you a ribbon or not. What you built here, this matters. Don't you ever forget that. He looked at me. His mouth parted slightly as if to speak. But no words came. He just gave a single, sharp nod and turned his attention. I squeezed his knee one last time before we turned off the pages. My heart raced and he turned it. Leo remained at his post while the pair began to wind down. The judges had gathered in front of the door, their heads bent low. But he didn't pop up. He just stood there, waiting, as if he knew his work wasn't finished yet. That's when the man walked in. I didn't pay him much mind at first. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a shock of untidy gray hair and a worn tweed jacket that looked out of place among the tracksuits and business casual attire of the other adults. He wasn't a judge. He had no clipboard. No badge. He was just there. He wandered slowly down the aisles, his hands clasped behind his back, peering at the projects with an absent-minded curiosity. He paused by the 3D printed wind tunnel, asked the student a question, nodded thoughtfully, and moved on. Then he stopped at Leo's table. I held my breath. He peered at the hand-painted sign, then leaned in closer to examine the prototype. He gently tapped the speaker cone with his index finger and watched the LED flicker. He looked at Leo and asked something I couldn't hear. Leo's shoulders straightened. He began to explain. He walked the man through the entire process, from his initial hypothesis to the final construction. The man listened. He really listened. His head tilted. His expression, one of intense concentration. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded slowly as Leo spoke. Then he pointed to the worn, spiral-bound notebook on the table. "May I?" he asked. Leo handed it to him. The man flipped through the pages. One by one, I watched his face change. His brow furrowed. His eyes narrowed. Not with skepticism, but with focus. As if he were his pages and calculations, his records of failed tests and subsequent improvements. Finally, he looked up, his gaze sharp and clear. He asked Leo another question. Leo answered it. Then the man looked across the room and his eyes met mine. He stepped back from the table, gesturing toward the window project. And he spoke. His voice was a beat. He looked directly at the cluster of judges at the front of the room. "This isn't just clever," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "This is viable." The world seemed to stop. The chatter died. The judges froze, their pens hovering over their clipboards. Parents turned their heads. The boy who had called my son a charity case was staring, his mouth agape. And Leo, my quiet, brilliant, invisible son, just stood there, frozen in the sudden, blinding spotlight of being seen. The silence that followed the stranger's words was a physical presence, heavier and louder than the preceding din. He stood there, his arm extended slightly toward my son's humble display. And he said it again, this time directly to the stunned judges who were now slowly approaching. "This concept is viable." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the judge who had offered the weary, indifferent smile, the one who hadn't even made eye contact, walked back to Leo's table. His expression was a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The look of a man realizing he has made a terrible, public mistake. He cleared his throat. A dry, rasping sound. "Son," he said, his voice suddenly thick with manufactured interest. Could you walk me through this one more time?" Leo looked at me, his eyes wide. I gave him a single, firm nod. "You've got this." I took a deep, steadying breath, turned to face the judge, and began again. He explained how he'd salvaged the pistols from the scout box grove neighbors. He described his countless failed attempts to kill the single crime, showing the judge the charred wires and facts he'd saved as a reminder of his learning process. He pulled out his notebook and walked into his his diagrams were in more efficient way. He explained how the energy could be stored in a small capacity. Essentially, power and sensors were this time, the judge lingered, his eyes wide. You figured this out by yourself, he stammered. Leo nodded. Mostly, he said honestly. My mom helped me find the parts online, but I built it. The woman who had called his project quaint was next. She hovered at the edge of the table, her face pale. This time, she asked real questions. She wanted to know about the resonant frequency of the diaphragm, about the potential for signal interference. She took notes in a tiny, elegant notebook, her earlier condescension replaced by a frantic heat, almost disparity curiosity. The parents who had ignored them, the ones who had whispered behind their hands, now formed a semicircle around the table. They were leaning in, straining to hear. Their own children's prize-winning projects suddenly forgotten. It was a bizarre, surreal transformation. The air crackled with a new kind of energy, not the competitive buzz from before, but the electric hum of a genuine discovery. The stranger, Dr. Finch, stood slightly apart from the crowd, his arms crossed, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He had lit the fuse and was now simply watching it burn. I finally threaded my way through the throng and walked up to him. Thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Who are you? He offered a warmed, slightly crooked smile. Alistair Finch, he said. I teach theoretical physics at Caltech. I'm just in town visiting my nephew. Of course he was. He told me he'd only come to most projects here are demonstrations of known principles. He explained, his voice calm. Your son's project is an act of genuine inquiry. He asked me a question. He looked away from me. He was now confidently answering a rapid-fire series of questions. This isn't just a school project. Finch said. It's a proof of concept. With the right guidance. This has real potential. I nearly sobbed with relief right there in the middle of the gymnasium. He handed me a business card. He wanted to connect us with a youth tech incubator, he advised. A program that provided mentorship and resources to promising young inventors. He needs support. Doctor, Finch said simply. The kind that schools like this often don't know how to give. Leo was radiating a light I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just happiness, it was validation. It was the profound, soul-deep relief of being truly understood. The awards ceremony was a blur. They created a new prize on the spot, the Pioneers Award for Innovative Inquiry, and presented it to him. He didn't win first place. It didn't matter. He had won something far more important. As the crowd thinned out, one of his teachers came over and patted his shoulder. I never knew you had this in you. Leo, she said with a bright, false smile. I wanted to say, he always had it in him. You just never bothered to look. That night, back in our quiet apartment, Leo placed the blue ribbon on the refrigerator door, securing it with a single magnet. Then he went to his room, took the prototype apart, and started sketching a new, improved design in his notebook. The praise hadn't made him complacent. It had made him hungry. He was already moving on to the next question, and I sat at the kitchen table, holding Dr. Finch's card in my hand, thinking about how close we had come to walking away from that moment, how easily his spark could have been extinguished. That man hadn't left him. Leo had finally given his bicycle and packed up his box. The story would have ended in seconds. But he still he held his ground. And when someone finally took the time to look, they saw what I had seen all along. My son was even he was on it. It's been 7 minutes since I saw his father. Doctor. Caldwell kept his mouth. Leo was assigned a mentor. The young engineer who saw determined, solid. They were in the process of filing a provisional patent for the Echo Harvester every Saturday. Instead of watching cartoons, Leo participates in video calls with physicists and engineers, talking about material science and energy efficiency with a fluency that leaves me breathless. He's designing a second-generation prototype, one he believes could power low-energy environmental sensors in remote wilderness areas. He's thinking bigger than our small town, bigger than himself. At school, everything is different. The kids who mocked him now watch him with a kind of bewildered respect. The local newspaper did a small feature on him. And now the teachers who once overlooked him ask for his input in science class. Leo hasn't let it change him. He's still quiet. Still kind. Still, the boy who prefers the company of a circuit board to a crowd. And me, I've changed. I used to walk through the world carrying the weight of my past. Of Mark's departure. Of our constant struggle. I thought my most important job was to shield Leo from every hardship. But that day taught me a profound lesson. My job isn't to fight his battles for him. It's to make sure he has the tools to fight them himself. It's to believe in him so fiercely that my belief becomes a quiet, unshakable foundation beneath his feet. Letting him rise on his own. People will always try to put you and your children in a box. To define you by your income, your address, or the ghosts in your past. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Your job is to teach your child to build something so true and so powerful that it speaks for itself. That's what Leo did. And my pride in him is a light that will never go out. If this story resonates with you, if you ever felt like the world was slipping out from your child, please take a moment to write this book. It tells the algorithm that stories of resilience and quiet strength matter. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that where you start doesn't have to be where you end. And I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Tell me about this moment or someone you know who the dad is out. A moment when one person's belief changed the world. And of every single one. If you want more true stories and reminder of the incredible strength of the human spirit, please subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know when you might need that reminder. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for seeing. We'll see you in the next one.